In this Blender tutorial, I'll show you how to create this procedural fried chicken material. So you could add this fried chicken material to any chicken object, but I'm going to be adding it to this drumstick. So we're going to be modeling this basic drumstick in the tutorial, and then we'll be adding the fried chicken material to the drumstick. So after we create the procedural material, I'll show you how to join it together into this custom node group so you can control the look of the material. So we first have this overall scale value to change the size of the material, and then we also have the different colors. So we have chicken color 1 and then also chicken color 2. Then we also have the subsurface. So the subsurface makes it look a bit more fleshy and makes it look more like food. And then we also have the crispy color, so you can change the color of that crispy texture. And then we also have the burnt color, so you can change the color of those little burnt areas on the chicken. And then we also have the burnt amount, so if you want to look very burnt, you could turn that down, or less burnt and you could turn that up. Then we also have the roughness of the material, and then we also have the bump strength to make the surface bump bigger or smaller. And then we also just have the burnt bump strength if you want to make that burnt part look more rough. And then we have the displacement strength to actually pop out the mesh. And if you'd like to purchase this material and help support the channel, then you can get that on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page. The links are in the description. And I've also just finished creating another 10 procedural materials. So these are the next 10 procedural materials that I've recently made. So I have just recently released Blender Procedural Material Pack number 17, which comes with these 10 new materials. And I've also updated my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack with all of the new materials. So all of my existing customers can re-download the product files to get the new updates with these new materials. And my Ultimate Procedural Material Pack comes with all of my procedural materials. They're pre-set up for Blender's asset browser with custom thumbnails, sorted catalogs, and customizable node groups. So every time I create another 10 procedural materials, I update the material pack with all of those new materials. And if you'd like to learn how to create any of my procedural materials, you can check out my Blender Procedural Material Tutorial playlist here on YouTube. So real quick, I'll show you what I have set up in the 3D viewport if you want to set up the blend file the same way that I have. So I'm going to start by modeling the chicken drumstick. So I'll go to the add menu, we'll go down here to mesh, and I'm going to add a UV sphere. And then right after I add the UV sphere, I want to scale it down much smaller because the default objects in Blender are quite large. They're a little bit higher than an average human when modeling to the real life scale in Blender. So I'm going to scale this object way down to like a 0.2, and then I will apply the scale by pressing Ctrl A, and we'll just hit scale. And then I can also use the object context menu to shade the object smooth. So I'm now going to go into edit mode, and I'll go to front view, and I'm going to go into wireframe. And we're now going to be extruding out the top part of the bone. So I'll deselect everything, and then I can just box select the top part here, and I'll extrude it out with the E key, and then I can scale that down a bit. And I have the proportional editing on. Sorry, let me just turn that off. So I can turn the proportional editing off right there. So I can now scale this down, and then extrude it up again, and we'll scale it down even more, and then extrude it up again. Let's also box select these and bring them down, and also box select this part, and we'll scale that down a bit, maybe bring it down there. All right, box select this top part here and extrude it up again. And then we're going to extrude this part up, and we're going to scale it up, extrude it out again, and kind of scale it up. We could also scale this entire thing up on the Z-axis, kind of bring it up like that to make the chicken leg. So I'm now going to turn on proportional editing by hitting the O key or by clicking right here. And I'm going to go down to the bottom, and this is a bit too round, so I want to change the shape of it to make it look more like a chicken leg. So I'll select some points here and kind of bring them down. And with the proportional editing on, you can scroll your mouse wheel to change the size of that circle there. And I'll kind of bring this parts down. Also select this point and maybe bring that down, and also bring that down a little bit. You can also bring this part in here and just kind of make it look a bit more random. I also might add a loop cut here by pressing Ctrl R and just placing a loop cut there, so it has a bit more vertices. And I might also scale this loop right there, make that a little bit bigger. All right, so I'm now going to go back to object mode, and I'll go back to solid view. And I'm going to press Ctrl 2 to add the subdivision surface modifier with 2 levels. And if I go right over here to the modifier properties, I just want to apply this. So I will just click on the drop down and click on apply. So if I go into edit mode now, you can see that as actual geometry. So now what I'm going to do is select this vertex here on the front, and I'll go over to the side, and I'll bring this in here. So just push that in there and use the proportional editing because I want to kind of flatten that part there on the chicken drumstick. Also select this part here and bring it in a little bit just to kind of flatten that area. So just something like that, so it's a bit more flat. You could maybe also bring the entire thing down a little bit. All right, so then what I'm also gonna do is press Ctrl 1 to add a subdivision surface with 1 level, and I'll turn the viewport and render values to 1. And why I'm making it so high poly is because we're gonna be using the displacements. So if the topology is more detailed, then the displacements will have more geometry to work with, so it'll look higher quality. Then I'm gonna go to front view, and I'm gonna rotate this over So it's kind of at an angle like a 45-degree angle. So then I also added a camera, and I just pointed the camera here at the chicken leg. And if you want to make the camera a square image like I did, you can go here to the output, and if you go up here to the format, you can make the X and the Y resolution just the same resolution, so it's a square image. So I'll hold down the Z button and move my mouse up into the rendered mode so you can see what it looks like in the rendered view. So because I'm going to be using the displacements and because I'm going for realism, I'm also going to be using the Cycles rendering engine. So you could use Eevee if you want to, but the displacements won't work, and it probably also won't look quite as realistic. So I would recommend using Cycles. So here for the lighting, I added these 4 different area lights right here, and I added these lights kind of all around here, and I kind of pointed them coming from the back, kind of pointing at the chicken drumstick to kind of give some nice rim light. So you can see right here, there's a little bit of a brighter light there kind of on the edges. If I go to the world properties real quick and just turn the strength down, you can kind of see those are what the lights are doing. It's just kind of giving a rim light to the edges. So for these lights, I added area lights. So if you go to the add menu, you can go to light and add area lights. And then I turned the power up to 50 and I made the color a very slight orangey color. And then also if you want to make them very long, you can go here to the shape and change it to rectangle. And then you can change the X and Y size. So again, I just made 4 of them kind of around the drumstick. And then also to get some nice realistic lighting and reflections in the world, if you go over here to the world properties, I added in the Christmas Photo Studio 02 HDRI. So this is a free HDRI from polyhaven.com. Link will be in the description if you'd like to download it. And I downloaded the 1K version and the HDR version. If you go to the world properties, you can click on the yellow dot next to color. You can choose environment texture, and then there'll be an open button. You can just click on open and then open up the downloaded HDRI. Now, if you want the world to be transparent in the background, you can go up here to the render properties and you can open up the film tab, and then you can check mark the transparent button just so that you can't see the world in the background. It makes it a bit less distracting, but it still will light the scene. And then also, if you click down here on the color management, I'm using the view transform of Filmic and the look to very high contrast just to pop out the colors and make the final render look nicer. Alright, so I'm in the shading workspace, so I have the 3D viewport right over here, and I'm in the rendered mode, and then I have the shader editor right over here. So I'm just going to make this side panel small so that it's out of the way. Let's click on new, and then I can rename this to fried chicken. And then I will also be using the Node Wrangler add-on in the tutorial to preview the different nodes. So if you don't have the Node Wrangler enabled, you can click on edit and you can go to Blender's user preferences. And then over here on the add-ons tab, if you go to the search and search for the Node Wrangler, you can just enable the Node Wrangler add-on. So it's built into Blender, and I'll show you how to use it in the video. So we can just close Blender's user preferences. So now let's start by creating the first group of textures. So to create the main texture, I'm going to go to the add menu and we're going to search for the noise texture. Let's drop it here. And then because I enabled the Node Wrangler, I can control shift and select different textures, and that is going to preview the texture on the object. Now you can see that the noise texture is actually being stretched a little bit on the object. So to fix this, I can select the noise texture and I can press Ctrl T, and that is going to add the texture coordinate and mapping nodes. Now I want to use the object coordinates, so let's put the object into the vector, and now you can see the texture isn't quite as stretched because the object coordinates is going to place the noise texture on the object more evenly. So now I can change some of the noise texture settings. So the scale here, I'm going to turn up to like a 27, and then I want it to be very detailed, so we'll turn the detail to the max of 15, and then I'll leave the other settings how they are. Now I want to make this texture more contrasty, so to do that I can go to the add menu and we can search for a color ramp. And let's put the color ramp here right after the noise texture, just stick it there. I can bring these nodes out of the way so we have a bit more space. And to make it more contrasty, I can click on the black tab and I can just drag the black tab over so it is much more contrasty. So that is going to be it for the base texture. So I'm going to click and drag and box select these nodes, and I will bring them over here. And then with these two nodes selected, I will press Ctrl J to join it together into a frame because I like to keep my nodes nicely organized. So we'll be joining the groups of nodes into these frames. And then if you select the frame, you can press F2 to add a label. And I'm going to call this mapping because these are the mapping nodes. And then these nodes here, these are the main textures. So I'm going to click and drag to box select these nodes. Again, you can press Ctrl J to join them together into a frame. And if you select the frame, you can press F2 to add a label. And I'm going to call it main texture. Alright, so the next group of textures that I want to create is the crispy texture. So we'll be creating that up here. So I'll go to the add menu and we're going to search for another noise texture, and let's drop the noise texture up here, and I can control shift and select it to preview it. And again, we want to use the object coordinates, so we'll take the mapping vector and we'll put that into the vector of the noise texture. So now let's change some of the settings. So I want to turn the detail to the max of 15, and then this roughness here, I'll turn it to like a 0.56. And then I do want to turn up this laconarity value, so I'll turn this up to like a 3.1. And the laconarity is going to add quite a bit more detail. If you turn it up really high, you can see it's going to add kind of a bunch of little dots. So I do just want to turn up a little bit, and that'll be nice for the crispy texture, because chicken skin kind of has a bunch of little dots, and so that gives a nice effect. Now I want to make this more contrasty as well, so I'll go to the add menu and I'm going to search for another color ramp, and let's stick that after the noise texture. So then I can drag the black tab and the white tab together, and if I drag them together they'll be much more contrasty. So I'll drag kind of the black tab here and the white tab over here. So now wherever the white parts are, that is where there's going to be little crispy parts on the chicken. But I want to give it a bit more detail and make it a bit more random, and I also want to make all the empty values white instead of black. So we're going to be creating another group of textures and we'll join them together. So let's box select both of these nodes, and I'll press Ctrl-Shift-D. So Ctrl-Shift-D will duplicate the nodes, but it's going to keep the wires plugged up, and I can Ctrl-Shift and select this color ramp to preview it. Now let's drag these values back a bit because I don't want it to be quite that contrasty, although I do want to drag the white part out. So I'll drag the white tab to about here and the black tab over to about here. And now let's change some of the settings for this other texture. So I'm going to turn the scale to like an 8, and then I also want it to be very detailed, so I'll leave the detail at 15, and the roughness here, I'll just turn that down a little bit to like a 0.55. And then the laconarity, I'll just turn that back to the default, which is 2. Now I do want to add a bit of distortion to this texture, so I'll turn it up just a little bit to like a 0.5. So now you can see it looks kind of wispy and it's kind of circular and distorted. So I now want to mix these groups of textures together. So I'll go to the add menu. We're going to search for the mix color node. Let's drop this down here. So then I want to put this top color ramp color into the factor. So this top noise texture with the color ramp, put that into the factor. And so now the black and white values on this texture here are determining what parts are going to be color A and what parts are going to be color B. So let's now take this color ramp color and let's put that into B. And then I'm going to leave the mix type here set to mix because we're using this color ramp to control what parts are A and B. So now here in color A, I can make this fully white. So now you can see the texture looks much more interesting. There's these little dark areas, but then there's also that little detailed texture there from this bottom one. So like that part there, that is this top texture, but then this little part here where there's kind of those little dots, that's the bottom one. So it makes a more interesting texture. So let's box select all these nodes, and again, I'll join them together into a frame, and then with the frame selected, I'll just add a label, and I'll rename this to crispy texture. Now I also want to create another group of textures, which is going to be some little burnt areas. So I want to make it look like the very, very edges of some of the chicken skin is just a little bit burnt. Maybe it was cooked for just a tiny bit too long, so there's a little bit of burnt areas, but it will be pretty subtle. So I'll go to the add menu, and I'm going to search for a Voronoi texture. So let's drop the Voronoi up here. And then again, I want to use the object coordinates. So we'll plug the mapping up to the vector of the Voronoi, and I can Control Shift and select the Voronoi texture. So if I turn the scale way down, you can see that the Voronoi is making a bunch of little dots. And when you look at chicken skin very close up, it kind of has these little bumps. And also those little burnt parts are going to have all these little dots. So it's going to be a bunch of little dots of little burnt areas. So that's why I'm using the Voronoi texture. Now, if I zoom really close up to the Voronoi, there's kind of these little white areas, and I want to make that more smooth. So if we click on the F1, we can change this to smooth F1 instead. And now you can see that those dots there look much more smooth. So now let's change some of the settings. So I'll turn the scale like a 200 so there are many dots, and I want it to be detailed, so we'll turn the detail to 15, and now you can see there's lots more detail. And then the roughness, I'll actually want to turn this down a little bit, so I'll turn it to like a 0.45. And I'll leave the other settings how they are. Now, it is a little bit hard to see those dots because they're kind of light, so I want to make it darker and make it more contrasty. So again, we're going to add another color ramp, and let's stick the color ramp here after the Voronoi. And then I want to click on the white tab here, and I'm actually going to click on the color, and I'll make this a little bit darker. So if it's darker, you'll be able to see that texture better. So if you want to use the exact same gray color that I'm using, you can click on the color and go over here to the hex value, and you can punch in B2, B3, B3. And then I want to add just a little bit more contrast, so I'm going to add another gray value in here. So I'll hold down the control key and click right here in the center, and that's going to add another one. And then this one, I'm going to make it a little bit darker so you can kind of see those dots a bit better. And the hex value that I'll be using for this center gray color is going to be a hex value of 6C, 6C6C. So that is going to be a great texture for the burnt parts. Now there's a problem with this, and that is that the burnt texture is all over the chicken, and I just want it to be in some spots here and there. So I'm going to create another group of textures, and then we'll be mixing it with these textures, and we're going to make it so the burnt part is only in a few areas here and there, and it will make it look more random and natural. So to do this, I'll go to the add menu, and we're going to search for another noise texture, and we'll put it above the Voronoi. And then again, just like all the textures, I want to plug the mapping vector up to the vector so that it is using the object coordinates. And let's Control Shift and select this noise texture to preview it. So for this one, I'll turn the scale up to 8 so you can see it a bit better. We'll turn the detail to the max of 15, and then I want to make this one even more detailed. So if I turn the roughness up to like a 0.72, you can see it's even more rough. And then I'll leave the other settings how they are. So then again, I want to make the noise texture more contrasty. So you can actually select this color ramp and you can duplicate it with Shift D, and I'll drop it here after this noise texture. Now I want to reset the values. So with the color ramp selected, you can hit the backspace and that is going to reset those values. So let's now drag the black tab over here to make it more contrasty, and the white tab, drag that over here. So this is going to be the mask for where the burnt parts are. So this way, there's not going to be burnt parts all over the place. There will just be some here and there. All right, so I can now mix up these two textures. So to mix the two textures, we can add the mix color node to mix two different colors. So we're going to drop the mix color node right here. Now, because this color ramp is the mask, it's telling it what parts are going to be color A and what parts are going to be color B. So this color ramp color, we're going to put that into the factor. So now this color ramp here, if I Control Shift and select it, you can see that is the burnt part. So let's take the color and we'll put that into color A, and then I can Control Shift and select the mix. Now I want to add the light values of this mask here. So if we click on the mix here, we can change it to lighten. So it'll add the light values. Then here on color B, I can just make this fully white. And so now you can see that the burnt parts are in just a few areas here and there. So there's a bunch of burnt parts there. There's kind of a burnt part here, but it's not all over the place. Like right there, you can't really see much of it, and kind of over there. So this is just really nice because it'll kind of break up the texture so there isn't burnt parts all over the place. And I think I might want to make this even more contrasty, so I'll just drag the white tab in just a little bit. So you can see if I drag that in, there's going to be less burnt areas. So I'll just drag that over, maybe to something like that. All right, so that is pretty good. So I'll box select these nodes and I'll join them together into a frame. You don't have to do that if you don't want to, but I just want to keep my nodes nicely organized so it's easy to understand. And then I'll also add a label, and I'm going to call this burnt texture. All right, so we're now going to be creating the texture for the displacements, and the displacements are actually going to pop out the mesh a little bit, and that'll make it look much more realistic. So let's go down here to the very bottom, and right down here underneath the main texture, we're going to create the displacement. So again, we'll go to the add menu. We're going to add a noise texture because the noise texture is really great for kind of adding random bumps. And then let's take the mapping vector and plug that up to the vector so it's using the object coordinates. And let's Control Shift and select the noise texture so we can see what it looks like. So I want to turn the scale up, so I'll turn the scale up to like a 7. And let's also turn the detail to the max of 15. And then the roughness, I actually want to turn the roughness down. Now why I'm doing this is because if you turn the roughness down, it looks more blobby. Whereas if the roughness is turned up, it looks more detailed. But I want it to be a bit more blobby just because I want there to be some little areas where it's kind of popping out the mesh, but I don't want it to be too detailed. So this roughness here, I'll turn this to like a 0.16. So now you can see it kind of looks like there's these little blobs of dark color. Now it's kind of hard to see, so again, we'll make it more contrasty by adding another color ramp node. So we'll drop the color ramp right here, and then I can kind of drag these values again. I can drag them over here, and I'm going to drag this one to about here, and then I want to make the white a bit brighter, so I'll drag the white tab to about there. Now, as I was mentioning earlier, chicken skin does seem to have a bunch of little bumps, and so I want to add a few bigger bumps to the displacement. So on this noise texture, we're going to turn up this lacunarity. So I'll turn this up to like a 10, and now you can see that there's like a bunch of little dots there in the texture. So that's looking pretty cool. And when we add it into displacements, all of the light parts are going to be popping out more, and then the black parts won't be popping out because the white parts are going to equal a value of 1, and then the black parts are equaling a value of 0. So the white parts will pop out of the mesh. Although there's a problem with this, and that is that the black parts would just be really smooth, and so it wouldn't really look that great. So I want to mix it with another noise texture just to add a tiny little bit of roughness and noise. So to do this, we're going to go to the add menu, and we're going to search for a mix color. Let's click on on the mix color, and we're going to drop it here after the color ramp. So I want to mix in another texture, and we can actually just use this noise texture that we've already made. So let's plug the factor of this noise texture up to color A, and then this color up here, that can go into color B. And you can Control Shift and select the mix to preview it. Now I'm going to click on this mix here, and I'm going to change it to add. So if I change it to add, now you can see it's going to add the light values, because the light values equal 1 and the black values equal 0, so add is going to add more of the white values. And then we can take this factor here and we can turn it up, and you can see it's just going to turn up those lighter values. So you can see if I turn this up here, now you can see like right there, that is going to be lighter. So I want to turn it all the way up to 1. So that part there will be kind of bumping out of the mesh a little bit. So let's box select these 3 nodes and we'll join them together into a frame, and we'll add a label and we'll call this displacement. So I can now take this add result here, and I'm going to plug it into the displacement of the material output. And I can Control Shift and select the principled shader now just to preview that. Now, if your displacements aren't working, there's a few things that we need to do. One thing that we need to do is we need to make sure we're in the Cycles rendering engine, because Eevee doesn't support material displacements, so make sure you're in Cycles to use the displacements. Now also, to make the displacements work, we need to actually tell the material that it can use the displacements. So we want to click here on the material properties on the side panel, and we want to scroll down here to the settings. So open up the settings, and then here on the displacement, you can see right now it's set to bump only, but we want to change this to displacement and bump, and this is telling the material that it can use the displacements. Now you can see that it's working now, but it's like jutting off to the side, and that is because this here, this yellow dot, that is color data. However, this purple dot right there, that is displacement data. So we need a node to convert the color data to displacement data, because generally in Blender, you want to plug the dots which are the same color up to each other, but you don't want to mix like a yellow dot and a purple dot. So to convert this, we'll go to the add menu and we're going to search for the displacement node, and we'll drop the displacement node here in between the add and the displacement. So now you can see it looks a bit better, but it's still not really working properly. And that's because we need to take the color data here, the result, and we want to put this into the height value. And why the height value is gray is because that is black and white data, but because black and white data and color data are both just colors, those can mix properly. So we're going to put that into the height value, and then you can see it comes out as a purple dot, so that can go into the displacement. So you can see it is working now, but it's still way too strong. So let's turn the scale way down just to like a 0.1, and now you can see that is definitely looking better, although it's still way too bumpy. So we need to make this much less strong. So I'll turn the scale to like a 0.02, so it is much more subtle. So now you can see there's just a little bit of surface bump all over the material, and that's going to make it look much more realistic. And this displacement node, I can just drop it here into the displacement. So I dropped it here into the frame just to keep the nodes nicely organized. All right, so the next thing that I want to add is the base color, because right now our chicken just looks super white. So I'm going to drag the principled shader and the material output over here so we have a little bit more space. So now I want to start mixing some of these textures together, and we'll eventually put that into the base color. So I'm first going to start by going to the add menu, and we'll add a mix color, and we'll use this to make the 2 main colors. So the main texture, the color can go into the factor. So because it's going to the factor, the light and dark values will tell it where it's going to be color A and where it's going to be color B. So here for color A, I'm going to make this kind of like a brownish reddish color. Let's also Control Shift and select it to preview it, kind of like a reddish brownish. And then color B, this is going to be kind of an orangish color, but it'll be a bit lighter. And if you want to use the exact same colors that I'm using, you can use the same hex values. So here in color A, the hex value you can punch in is A6, 3D, 23. And then here on color B, the hex value is going to be CD, 8945. So that's going to be a nice base color for our chicken. So I now want to add in the crispy texture. So we'll take this mix node, we'll duplicate it, and we're going to stick here after the first one. And then we can take this crispy texture, and we're going to take the mix, and we're going to put that into the factor. So now we're basically just adding in that other texture. So then this mix node here, I actually want to put this one into color B. So now color A, this is going to be the crispy texture. So for color A, I want to make this kind of like a strong red color and a bit darker. And you can see now, if I Control Shift and select this mix, wherever the dark parts are on the crispy texture, that is going to show up here on the mix, and it'll show up as this color. So if I make this really dark, you can kind of see it better. So I just want to make it kind of like a dark red. And the hex value that I'll be using for the crispy texture is going to be 7C2712. So let's do the same thing, but this time we're going to add in the burnt texture. So we'll click on the mix, we'll duplicate it, and we're going to drop it here. And then we can take the burnt texture, we'll take that result, and we're going to put that into the factor of this mix. And let's Control Shift and select the mix to preview it. And then again, we want to put this mix result into color B. So now color A, that is going to be the burnt texture. So if we just make it fully black so you can actually see it, I'll just make it fully black. You can see there is going to be the burnt texture. If I Control Shift and select this light in here, wherever that is dark, that is going to show up on this mix here, and it will show up as that dark color. And so for this color of the burnt part, I'm just going to make it a very dark red, so it's like a really dark brown. And the X value for the burnt color is going to be 2C, 0C, 04, if you want to use the same color I'm using. So now we have these little burnt parts all over the chicken. So I'm going to box select these 3 nodes. I'll join them together into a frame. Let me just compress them so that it looks a bit nicer. And I'll add a label to the frame and I'll call it color. So let's box select these 2 nodes and drag them back, and I can take this mix result and we'll put that into the base color, and I can Control Shift and select the principled shader, and now that's looking a lot more like chicken. Now I also want to control the roughness value here, and I don't just want the entire thing to have the same roughness. I want some parts to have more roughness and other parts to have less roughness, just to add a bit of variation. So let's take this mix result and I can put that into the roughness, and then let's box select these nodes and drag them over so I have a bit more space. So to control the roughness values, we need to change the color. So to do that, we can just add another color ramp, and we'll put this here before the roughness. So now I can drag the white tab over and the black tab over to control the roughness. So you can see if everything is very white, it'll be really rough, but if everything is very black, it'll be super shiny. So I'm going to drag the black tab over to about here and the white tab over to about here, but then I'll click on the black tab, and this color here, I'm going to make it quite a bit lighter so it's not quite that shiny. And the hex value that I'll be using for this light gray color will be A7, A7, A7. And then later on, when we create the custom node group, I want to be able to control the roughness. So we can just control the light and dark values. So if we go to the add menu, we can search for the hue saturation value, and we'll put this after the roughness. So this value here, that is going to make it lighter or darker, and so you can see it's going to make it more shiny or more rough. So we can use that later in the custom node group. So let's box select these nodes. We'll join them together into a frame, and we'll rename the frame, and we can just rename this to roughness. Now also to make this look a bit more like food and to make it look more fleshy, we can add some subsurface scattering. And subsurface scattering will allow a little light to go through the object. So let's open up the subsurface tab here on the principled shader, and this weight here, I'll just turn this all the way up to 1. So now there's a bit of subsurface scattering, so a little bit of red light is kind of coming through the fried chicken, and that makes it look more organic and more fleshy. Now there already is quite a bit of surface bump because of the displacement, but I do also want to add some data into this normal here to give it some more bump. So I first want to add in the crispy texture. So let's go up here to the crispy texture, and I want to take this mix result here. Let's pull out a wire from the crispy texture, and we can put that into the normal to give it some surface bump. Now there's some weird shading issues, and that is because this here is color data, but then this here is normal data. So we need a node to convert it to bump data. So we'll go to the add menu, and we're going to search for a bump node, and we're going to drop the bump node here between the mix and the bump. So drop it there, and I can just like drag it down here to keep it more organized. And then you can see it's still not really working. There's still some really dark areas, and that is because I need to actually put the mix result into the height value, and that'll convert it to bump data. So you can now see the strength value will change that surface bump. So let's turn the strength to just like a 0.2, so it's not quite that strong. So now I want to mix multiple bump maps together because I want to add in these other groups of textures. So to mix multiple bump maps together, we can duplicate the bump node with Shift D, and we can drop it here after the first one, and the normal can go through the normal. So we now have this extra height value that we can add data into to add it to the surface bump. Now I also want to add the displacement to the bump as well, but I actually want to add it before this bump node here. So I'm actually going to click on this bump, and we'll duplicate it one more time with Shift D, drop it here, and the normal can go up to the normal just like that. So we now have 3 of them. So now we can take this displacement add here, and we can put that into the height value as well. And this one again, I'll leave to 0.2. And then also, if you want to, you can invert some of these. So I'm not going to invert this one because that just looks a little bit more flat, but this bump here, I will invert that because I think it looks a little bit better. All right, so now let's go here to the third one. And for the third one, I want to add some even more bump, and I want to add bump where this noise texture is. So if I Control Shift and select this noise texture here, you can see that there's those little dark areas, and so I want to make those pop out more. If I Control Shift and select the add here, that's just giving some overall surface bump, but if I Control Shift and select this color ramp, you can see I just want to add some more bumpy areas where that is. So let's take this noise texture factor here, and I can put this into the bump height as well. So put it there into the third one. And then you can actually Control Shift and select the bump if you want to kind of see what the bump is doing. So there's the bump map, and I can turn up the strength to make that a bit stronger. Now I want to make it more contrasty. So again, we're going to search for another color ramp. So let's click on the color ramp. We can drop it here between this noise texture and the bump. So drop it there. So it plugs it up. And then also it's in the wrong frame. So I need to press Alt P just to remove it out of that frame. And we're going to stick it here. So now I can just change these values. So if I just Control Shift and select to preview it, I want to drag the black tab out to about here, and then the white tab, I'll drag it out to about there. So it's pretty contrasty. So if I just Control Shift and select this bump node here, I can just change that strength, although I do want to leave it at a 0.2. But you can see that right here, it kind of looks like it's going back in a little bit. So if I click on invert, now that part's going to be popping out. You can see there, it looks like it's going in, but then there it looks like it's popping out. Now I want to add one more layer of bump, and that is going to be the burnt areas. So I want the burnt areas to pop out a bit more. So let's take this bump node here, and I'll duplicate it with Shift D, and we can just drop it down here. So the normal from this bump is going to go into the normal of this bump. So I can bring this up here now, and then we can replace this for the normal. So this bump normal can now be replaced for this one here. So stick that one in there. So now we have this extra height value. So let's go all the way up here to the burnt texture, and we're going to take the lighten result. This is going to be the burnt texture, and let's put that into the height value. And then I can Control Shift and select the principled shader to preview it. Now for this one, I want to make it a little bit stronger, so I'll turn the strength up to like a 0.3. But if I zoom really close up to the fried chicken, if I change that strength, you can see the burnt texture is a lot stronger and it looks more bumpy if I turn that strength up. So that's just going to add a little bit of bump to those burnt areas. But you can see if I turn this up, it's kind of making the entire thing look a bit darker. And so I want to make it more contrasty to just make the burnt parts just affect those burnt areas. So let's click on this color ramp here, and we'll duplicate it with Shift D, and we're going to drop it here in the wire between the lighten and this last bump. So just stick it right there. And let's just drag these down so we have a bit more space. And also let's box select these nodes and drag them down so we have a bit more space. I can kind of drag this up here. All right, so let's select all these nodes here, and I can join them together into a frame again, bring this down, and then I can add a label, and I'm going to call this bump. All right, so now let's Control Shift and select this color ramp to preview it, and I want to make it more contrasty, so I'll drag the black tab over here, and then the white tab I'll kind of drag maybe to about there. So now if I Control Shift and select this bump, if I turn the strength up, you can see it is adding that bump, but it's only adding it to those specific areas because it's more contrasty. So if I Control Shift and select the principled shader, you can kind of see now it's just controlling just those burnt areas, but not the entire thing. So that looks a bit better. All right, and that is the finished procedural material. So it was really complex, but there's the finished procedural material. So I hope you were easily able to follow along, even though that was a pretty complex material. So I'm now going to show you how to join it together into a custom node group so we can add custom values so it's easier to control how the material looks. So I'm going to click and drag to box select all the nodes except the material output, and I'll press Ctrl G to join them together into a node group. And you can hit the tab key to go in and out of the node group. So let's drag the node group over here to the material output. We can also drag this side here to make it a little bit bigger. And then right here, we can rename it, and I'm going to rename it to fried chicken. Then you can select the node group and you can hit the tab key to go into the node group. I'll press the N key to open the side panel, and let's also make this panel smaller because we don't need it. And you can see there's displacement and BSDF if you go over here to the group tab. Now I want the shader to be on top, so I'll click and drag and then let go so it's on top. And then I'm also going to rename this to shader because I like that better. So outside of the node group, you can see it says shader and then displacement. So let's go back into the node group. Now in a node group, you'll have this group input here, which is always on the left side. So we can plug values up to the group input, and then that way we can control those values outside of the node group. So this mapping node is plugged up to all of the textures. So this scale value is going to control all the textures at once. So we can take this scale and we can put it into the extra socket here, so we can control the entire scale of the material. But you can see if I click on the scale here, you can see that it's going to give us 3 values. But I instead just want to use 1 value. So let's click on the type here and I can change it to float, and that way it'll just be 1 single value. And then this default value, we need to turn that to 1. And then if we go outside of the node group, we need to turn the scale value back to 1. But now I can just drag this around and that'll change the size of the entire material. So let's go back into the node group. So now I want to add the colors of the chicken. So let's take the group input here and I can drag it over here. We'll just drag it above the color, and I can now take color A and put that into the extra socket, and then color B, I can put that into the extra socket, and I can just rename these to chicken color 1, and then also this one chicken color 2. Now I also want to be able to control the subsurf. So let's drag the group input right over here, and we can take this weight value on the subsurf, we can put that into the extra socket, and then if I double click on this, I'm just going to rename it to subsurface. And then I want to be able to control the crispy color, so we'll drag this back, and we can take this color here, this is color A, we'll put that into the extra socket, and then I can rename this to crispy color. Then I want to be able to control the amount of crispy parts on the texture. So if we go right up here to the crispy texture, it's right here. If I control shift and select it, you can see this is where it is, and those dark parts are going to be crispy. So if we make the texture darker, that'll add more of the crispiness. So let's drag this crispy texture back, and I can go to the add menu, and we're going to search for the hue saturation value. And just for now, I'll stick it right up here. So I want to join these 3 wires into 1 wire. So I will hold down the shift key and I will right click and drag over these 3 wires and let go. And so that's going to add this reroute here. So there's just basically 1 wire and then it splits into the 3 values. So I can take this hue saturation value and let's stick it here in between the mix and the reroute. And then I can stick this here into the frame, and also this here, the reroute, just stick it into the frame. All right. So now this hue saturation value has the value, and the value is going to make it lighter or darker. So what I can do is take the value and I can put that into the extra socket here, and I'll just rename this to crispy amount. So if we just control shift and select the principled shader again, I also want to hit the tab key to go out of the node group and then just control shift and select the shader. You can now see if I change the crispy amount, it's going to add more or less of that crispy texture. So let's go back into the node group, and I also want to add the burnt color. So let's drag the group input here. We have this burnt color here on color A, so we'll put that into the extra socket, and we can rename this to burnt color. And then I want to control the burnt amount just like we did for the crispy texture. So if I go right up here to this burnt texture, I can add another node here to control the brightness. So again, I'll shift and right click and drag over these wires just to join it together here into this reroute, so I can add another node here. So then I'll go to the add menu, we'll search for a hue saturation value, and we'll drop it here between the reroute and the lighten. And we can also put both of them into the frame just to keep that nicely organized. So now this value is going to make the burnt texture lighter or darker. So if we turn it all the way down to 0, it looks like the whole chicken is burnt. So let's click on the group input and I can drag it up here, and we can take the value and we'll put that into the extra socket. And then I can rename this to burnt amount. Then I want to be able to control the roughness of the material, so we'll drag the group input down here, and we have this hue saturation value, and so again the lighter and darker values will control the roughness. So I'll put the value into the extra socket, and then I can rename this to roughness here on the side panel. And finally, I want to control the displacement strengths and the bump strengths. So we'll drag the group input down here, and you can see these 3 nodes right here, these are controlling the different strengths, and they're set to 0.2. And then this one over here, we'll use this one later, but you can see that they're all the same value of 0.2. So I'll put the strength into the extra socket here, and then I can put the other strengths into the same exact socket. So this way, one value will control these 3 values at once. So we'll stick that there, and then if I double click on this, I can rename it to bump strength. Now this last one here, I thought it would be cool to have it its own value, because this one is controlling the burnt bumpiness. So if you want to make it look extra burnt, you could kind of turn that up and it looks kind of charred. So let's take the strength and we'll put that into a new socket right there. And then if I double click on this to rename it, I'll rename it to burnt bump strength. And then finally, I want to be able to control the displacement strength. So let's go right back here, and we have this displacement, and we have this scale value to change the displacement. So we'll put the scale into the extra socket right here, and then I can rename this to displacement strength. Alright, so I'll take the group input and I'm going to drag it right here underneath the mapping. I'll hit the N key to close the side panel and we'll go outside of the node group. And here is the finished material. So let's just review the material. So we have the overall scale of the texture, then we also have the different chicken colors, we also have the subsurface, and then we also have the crispy colors, then we also have the crispy amount, and then we also have the burnt color, and then we also have that burnt amount. Then we have the roughness of the material, and we also have the bump strength, so that's the surface bump, and then we just have the burnt bump strength if you want to make it look extra burnt. And then finally we have the displacement strength to actually control the displacement to pop out the mesh. So that's going to be it for this tutorial, so I hope you enjoyed this and thank you for watching. And if you'd like to help support the channel and purchase the material, you can get that on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page, the links are in the description. And I've also just recently released Blender Procedural Material Pack 17 because I've created another 10 procedural materials. So you can check out that material pack with the link in the description. And if you've already purchased my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack, then I've just updated the material pack with all the new materials, so you can re-download the product files to get those 10 new procedural materials. And to learn how to create more procedural materials, definitely check out my Blender Procedural Material tutorial playlist here on YouTube. So I hope you enjoyed this and thank you for watching.